If you would open with me in the book of Matthew, chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, we're going to read verses 24 through 39. While you find Matthew chapter 10, just a quick reintroduction. I'm not going to review anything of the message last week, but this is basically part 2 of last week's message, so I'm just finishing last week's sermon. Part 1 was do not love the world, love God. Part 2, do not fear the world, fear God. And this is coming from the place of around the turn of the year, late last year, early this year. I began thinking about what could I say to the youth of this church that are teenagers, that are making decisions about college or not college, entering the workforce, maybe moving away, going away, wherever the Lord's taking them or leading them. And what would I say to them, especially when I consider the world that they're inheriting from us? I can't say that we're giving you a better world than the world that I inherited, as I was a teenager coming into an adulthood in the early to mid 90s. I can't say it's a better world now than it was then. And I can't make any promises about what the next number of years will bring. I do think that the closer, John called it, it was in our message last week, the last hour. I think we're so far along into the last hour. If it was the last hour 2,000 years ago, it must be the last minutes at this point in time. And I think that you get to a certain point as you study the Bible concerning eschatology where the rails are just going to come off. Things are not going to get better. They're just going to be. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 teaches us, or 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 rather, teaches us that there will be a great apostasy before the return of the Lord. And I think we're getting to that point where you're beginning to see those types of things happen, where we can't promise you that the world you're going to have is a better world. But we can make you prepared for a world that is adverse to Christianity, adverse to Christ. We can make you prepared for that world. And I think that's how Christ wants us to live. Not contingent upon the circumstances that are in the world and the condition of the world, but living independent of that through Scripture, through Christ. And I think that's what you're going to see here in Matthew chapter 10 as we talk about do not fear the world, but fear God. And the fear of God is the cure or the answer to any other fear. If we were to take the time and go through all the scriptures that say do not be afraid or fear not, there's 113 passages or verses in the scriptures that make those commands: do not fear, fear not, be not afraid, so on and so forth. There's 113 of them. So there has to be a lot of fear in this world for you to say that 113 times. In fact, it's the most commonly stated negative prohibition in Scripture, is not to fear. So there must be a lot of fear in the world, a lot of phobias to say it that many times. And what I did is, when you analyze all the times it says do not fear, it falls into 3 categories: the fear of circumstances, the fear of people, and the fear of death. Those are the 3 things where the fears kind of fall into one of those 3 categories. And the answer to those fears is the fear of God, because God is sovereign over the circumstances, He's sovereign over death, and He's sovereign over people. So He calls for us to fear God, not to fear the things that God is sovereign over. And so let's take up this text here in Matthew chapter 10, verse 24, beginning there, and we'll read through verse 39, and then we'll teach on this passage. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher and a servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call those of his household? Therefore do not fear them, for there's nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light, and what you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground without your Father's will? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. So just by way of a little introduction here to the text, the context is, if you were to go back, the first verses of Matthew 10, this is Jesus sending out the 12 disciples, the 12 apostles, sending them out, and he sends them out on a Jewish mission to go just to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, to preach the gospel of the kingdom, that the king is here, to make a presentation, an offer of the kingdom to them. Of course, they refuse him, and he's crucified and rises again, and the church is built, and the gospel goes out, and the kingdom is delayed. But that's another message for another time. It's in that context of them going out, and you're going to notice, for example, in verse 16 and 17, he says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves." So he identifies us as sheep. Sheep are not particularly bright. Sheep are not strong creatures. They're not equipped for defensive. That's why they need a shepherd. They don't defend themselves well. They're not fighters. They're passive. And he's sending us out in the midst of wolves who are aggressive, who are apex predators, and he's sending us out in that context. In other words, Jesus' goal for reaching the world, Israel at that time, the world at this time, is not by using fame and fortune and popularity, but rather using weakness, using those who are prey in the midst of predators. And that's us. We're the prey. We're the sheep, and the world that we're being sent out into are the wolves or the predators. And it's phenomenal when you think about the humility of that and the weakness of that view, that we're going out not as these big, powerful, mighty individuals, but we're going out as sheep in the midst of wolves. And it's in that context that he says, therefore be wise as serpents, right? Because you're prey in the midst of predators, you better be wise as serpents, and harmless as doves. The word harmless there means innocent. So we're wise, we're not foolish. We're not supposed to run into the den of wolves, right? And just, have our lives taken from us. We're supposed to use wisdom. Paul escaped persecution multiple times. Jesus escaped persecution multiple times. In fact, he tells us in this passage that when they persecute you in one town, you're to flee to the next, right? Don't stand there and just die a martyr. Flee from that town and go to the next. If they don't want to hear it, somebody else does. And I think that's a good principle to follow for world missions, is if you go somewhere they don't want it, you move on and you go somewhere where they do want it. And he says after that, but beware of men. Beware of men, right? Those are the wolves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils, scourge you in their synagogues. And he goes on, and he's gonna list. This is just kind of a little summary, so you see what he has said before this. He breaks down the persecution into 4 parts. Councils and synagogues in verse 17. That's religious persecution. He talks about governors and kings in verse 18. That's civil persecution. And then he's going to talk about the family in verse 21, brother against brother, father against child, so on and so forth. Family persecution. And then he just summarizes it in verse 22 and says, you will be hated by all. So then he says this universal persecution, no matter where you go in this world with the gospel, there will be persecution. So it's kind of broken down into 4 parts. So again, picking up in verse 24 now, that's starting with the message today. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher and a servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house, who's the master of the house? Jesus, right, is the master of the house. If they call him Beelzebub, Beelzebub is to say prince of devils. On multiple occasions, Jesus was accused by people, Mark 3, I think John 7, John 8, of having a demon. They accused him of being Beelzebub, the actual prince of devils, in other words, the devil himself. Now imagine that you're Jesus, you're the Son of God incarnate, you're perfect, you never sinned against anyone, you're a perfect individual, and yet they have called you the devil, accused you of being demon-possessed, and that is what they've done to the master of the house. If they've said that about the master of the house, how much more are they going to say about us? How many worse things could they say about us who are imperfect? Who have sinned, who have fallen short, who have failed. How much more worse things are they going to say about us than what they said about the master of the house? And I thought about this, just taking the words at the end of verse 24. I actually threw a highlighter mark through it just this morning because it stood out to me again. It says, nor a servant above his master. Of course, the master is Jesus, we're the servants. And I was thinking about John 15, verse 20. He says that a servant is not greater than his master. And he said, if they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they'll keep yours also. Right? And I began to ask myself that question, and I ask it sometimes, is, am I greater than my master? How is it that the world hated Jesus, but the world loves me? How come they persecuted Jesus to the death and the world doesn't persecute me at all? Am I greater than my master? Am I better than my master? Or am I so unlike my master that they don't see the connection between me and my master, and therefore I avoid any type of persecution like my master endured? There's this idea in Christians, and it's outside of Christianity as well, but there's this idea among Christians that if you and I, as a church, if we just are more like Jesus, if we just become more like Jesus, everyone will love us. The whole world will love us. Everyone would come to this church if we were just more like Jesus. I think it was even Mahatma Gandhi, just showing you that this is outside of the church too, this type of thinking. He said that if Christians were like Christ, the whole world would be Christians. But that is not what Jesus taught. That's not what the Bible teaches. That's not what the experience of Christianity for 2,000 years has been. I assure you this much. Again, dealing with that thought, if we're more like Jesus, everyone will love us and want to be a part of us. I'm dealing with that thought. There was nobody on this earth more like Jesus than Jesus. Would you agree with that statement? There's no one more like Jesus than Jesus. And Jesus, you're not going to love people better than Jesus loved people. You're not going to preach better, teach better. You're not going to be kinder. You're not going to be gentler, more understanding, more compassionate. You're not going to heal better, deliver people better. You're not going to do anything better than Jesus. Jesus never sinned against anyone, and there's nobody in here that can say that same thing. Just think about it. He is perfection, and yet the world persecuted him to the place of death, the death of the cross, the most brutal form of death. So it's not if I become more like Jesus, I'll be more loved by the world. If I'm more like Jesus, I'll be more hated by the world. And this persecution that Jesus is talking about, it falls into, and the reason why he's saying do not fear, 3 occasions in this text, what he's talking about here is 2 things. In verse 25, you'll notice, if they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call those of his household? So verse 25, it deals with what people say. Verse 28, he talks about do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. So he's talking there in verse 28 about actual physical brutality, physical death, persecuting people physically, imprisonment, death, take loss of job, loss of family, which he talks about later in verses 34 through 39. There's all these different variations of persecution, but the one that we always step over that is actually the most common form of persecution is what people say about you, what people call you. Just like they called Jesus the Prince of Devils, how much worse are they going to call you? For example, in Matthew 5, verse 11, it's in the Beatitudes, right? And he says, I want to make sure I get it exactly right. I just got to turn back a few pages. But Jesus says, blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you. And say, notice the word say, and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. The word revile, it means to mock and to scoff, to laugh, to scorn. It's talking about basically ridiculing. Think about making fun of somebody, right? That's what it means to revile. They're going to make fun of you. And he says, when they make fun of you, when they laugh at you, when they scoff at you, when they persecute you, that's aggressive harmfulness. They're the aggressors. Again, you're the sheep, they're the wolves. You're in the passive, they're in the aggressive. They're coming after you. You're not going after them. You're not looking for trouble. You're just out preaching the gospel. And they're coming after you, and they say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Right, we don't think about that as being persecution, but that is the primary way of persecution. And the goal of persecution is this. Proverbs 29, verse 25, it says that the fear of the Lord is a snare, a trap. We got a lot of hunters in here. A lot of people that know. I mean, you guys probably set traps for raccoons like from spring till fall, right? And you get a live trap out there, and you get that raccoon in the trap. The raccoon's not going anywhere. He's hostage. He's staying there till you come out and put a 22 in him or something like that, right? And he's not going anywhere. He's confined. He's restrained. And the fear of man is a snare. It's a trap, meaning that when you yield to the fear of man and people say something about you falsely, and it should be stated, for my sake, Jesus said. We're not talking about political persecution here. We're not talking about persecution because you're a Republican versus a Democrat, or because you're conservative and you're not liberal. We're talking about persecution for His sake. Persecution for Christ. We're not looking for political persecution. But it's a snare, it's a trap. So if I yield to that fear of man, they're saying this about me, they're reviling me, they're making fun of me, and it's designed to cause you to be entrapped, ensnared, so that you don't have the freedom to speak. You don't have the freedom to do. How many times in our lives did we not do something or not say something only because of the fear of people? Fearing what they were going to say about us. Come on, I mean, this is addressed to the teenagers, it's for everybody. But think about it, as a teenager, how many things do you not say or do because of peer pressure of what other people in the class, your friends, the cool kids or whoever they are, what they're going to say? Right? And that's designed to cause you to be in a box where you can't get out. You're restricted. You can't say this. You can't do this. And I got to live my life like I'm in a trap all the time, because I'm always thinking about, what are they going to say about me? What are they going to say about me? What are they going to say about me? It's very effective. It's very effective. It's the most effective tool to getting people to be silenced. It's the most effective tool to get people to be restrained and not do something, is just by simply saying something about them. By human nature, we want to be loved, we want to be accepted, we want to be embraced, we want people to like us, right? I mean, I don't want people to dislike me, right? Again, we're sheep. We're wise, but we're harmless. We're innocent. We're not trying to look for trouble, stir up trouble, make trouble, or anything like that. Just trouble comes for us. Right? But this trap, this snare, where you won't do, you won't say, because I don't know what my friends are going to say. I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what my family's going to say. I don't know what they're going to do to me. I don't know what they're going to say about me. And we just, and so we're silenced through this fear of man because of what they say, and that is persecution. It's persecution when they call Jesus the Prince of Devils. It's persecution when they say, I'm a cult leader. Right? It's persecution when they say that Jesus has a demon. It's persecution when they say, I'm a wolf. Right? That's persecution. That's what it looks like. That's what it sounds like. It's designed to get you to be silenced, to stop. And you'll remember that, well, I'll come to that later. So he's going to give us 3 reasons. He says, do not fear 3 times. He's going to say it in verse 26, verse 28, and verse 31. Do not fear. Those exact words 3 times. And he's going to give us 3 reasons why it is that you and I are not to fear. 3 reasons, okay? And what is the context of this? Is so important. We'll come back to it in just a moment here. I mean, really in just a moment. It's do not fear in the context of going out as sheep in the midst of wolves, of beware of men, because you're going out, you're proclaiming the gospel, you're preaching the word, you're teaching the word, and by doing that, it's drawing persecution from people, from the men that you're to beware of. That's the context. That's so important. In fact, I'm just going to get ahead of myself, all right? It's so important to get that right, because in the next verse, for example, let's read verse 27. You ready? Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light. Whatever you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops. Verse 32, therefore whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. Do you see this idea in this context? What I tell you in secret, what I tell you in the dark, get out there and speak in the open. And what I speak in your ear, just go out and preach it from the housetops. It's this open proclamation, and this open proclamation is what is leading to persecution. All right. I was thinking about it this way. If we as the church, not just this church, I'm just about the church in general. Think about missions, think about our lives, whether it's in this community or outside of this community, whether it's here or around the world. If all we did, folks, let's say this, that all we did was we filled people's stomachs with food. We taught people how to farm, grow their crops. We built hospitals, we did medical care, we gave dental treatment, built schools for kids to go to, orphanages, and we did all of these charitable things, and all we did was humanitarian relief, and that's all we did. Nobody would hate us. Everybody wants their life on this planet to be easier, to be better. You go to a third world country, they will delight in you. If you open your pockets and you just give a bunch of money to a certain cause, they will delight in you. You'll never be persecuted. The church will never be persecuted for humanitarian relief. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do those things, okay? But where we will be persecuted is by preaching the gospel, by preaching the truth, by preaching the word. That is when persecution comes. Why did they crucify Jesus? I want you to think about this for a minute. This scripture was quickened to me just this morning. John, I'll read it to you. You don't have to turn there. Just listen to this. John 10, verses 31 through 33. John 10, 31 to 33, if you're taking notes. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. I like that word again. You know how many times they tried to kill Jesus before they actually killed him? Right? They picked up stones again to stone him. They're going after Jesus again. And listen to this. Jesus answered them. Listen to his question. Many good works I have shown you from my Father. For which of those works do you stone me? Is it for feeding the 5,000? Is it because I filled the stomachs of people that were following me? Is it because I healed the sick, cleansed the leper, raised the dead? Is it for these things? And you know what they said? The Jews answered him, saying, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy. Blasphemy. Right? In other words, when Jesus preached, what did they hear it as? They heard it as, that's blasphemy. Because you being a man make yourself God. Right? The reason they crucified Jesus, the charge that was brought against Jesus is that he claimed to be the Christ, the Son of the living God. It wasn't for what Jesus did that they killed him. It's not for the good works that Jesus did that they killed him. They will love you for your good works. What they will kill you for, what they will hate you for, what they will despise you for is what you preach. When you preach Jesus as the only way of salvation and every other way is the way of damnation, the world will hate you. If someone was to invite me, it'll probably never happen. If I was to get invited on Fox News and I appear on Fox News and they're asking me, questions related to religion and Christianity, they asked me this question, what do I believe? And I said, Jesus is the only way of salvation, and for anyone that does not believe in Jesus Christ, they're going to be condemned to hell. How many friends do you think I'll make in that interview? Right? None. They'll say, well, because we're a pluralistic society. Well, what about the Muslims? They worship God. Well, what about the Jews? They worship God. Well, what about all these other religions? What about the Buddhists? What about the Hindus? What about all these other Eastern religions? They're good people, just like what you're trying to be. And all the whatabouts come out. Right? They won't hate you when you're silent. They will hate you when you say something. Because you're making an exclusive claim in a world of inclusivity where all roads lead to salvation. Right? Where the idea of salvation is everybody who's a good person will be saved. And you come in and you say, no, there's one gate, there's one path, there's one road, there's one group of people, and there's one expected outcome for those that are in that narrow path. Right? And that is counterculture to everything that our culture believes. That's when the persecution comes. It doesn't come to silence. It comes to the proclamation of the gospel. That's the context. And I want you to understand that as you grow up, as you're a teenager, you go out into the world and everything else. You don't have to look for trouble. If you are vocal, if you share your faith with other people, people are either going to love you for it or they're going to hate you for it. There will be very little middle ground. In talking about that, one thing that came to mind a number of weeks ago was in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Again, I'm just trying to build this case that it's revolving around the proclamation of the gospel, the teaching of the word. For example, before we go to 1 Corinthians 2, I'm just going to cite one really quickly. And it's getting late, I see, so I need to get moving here. But Galatians 1, verse 10, you'll remember that Paul says, he says, do I still please men? For if I still please men, I wouldn't be a bondservant of Christ. Now, in the context of it, you have to understand the context of what he's saying. That's in the context of the gospel. He's defending the gospel from a group of people called Judaizers that are coming into his churches that he established in Galatia. And when he leaves, they come in and they say, you know, Paul wasn't correct. It's not justification by faith alone in Christ alone. It is justification also by the works of the law. What he's getting at is, I could have compromised. I could have yielded to the fear of man, be a man pleaser. And I could have just said, you know, is it really that big of a compromise to just simply say, I mean, what's wrong with doing the works of the law? Right? We'll just, all right, fine. I don't want to be fighting with these Judaizers all the time and scuffling with them. Fine. Just, you're not doing any harm by keeping the works of the law. So yeah, sure, let's just add that in there. Right? That would be the tendency, right? That would be modern day Christianity right there, what I just explained, right? We'll just buckle and we'll say, yeah, okay, it's not a big deal, because if you're doing the works of the law, how's that bad, you know? And we would find a way to compromise and mediate on that. And Paul says, no. If you preach a different gospel than the one I preached, let him be anathema. Let him be accursed. Anathema means devoted to damnation, doomed for damnation, devoted to destruction. One translation says, may he be condemned to hell. He condemns people to hell for preaching a different gospel than the one he preached. But if he was yielding to the fear of man, to be a man pleaser, he would have compromised the gospel at that point in time to be accepted by them, and his life would have been trouble-free. He wouldn't have had all the persecution he faced. But it was through the preaching and what he was preaching that he says, do I still please men? For if I still please men, I wouldn't be a bondservant of Christ. Right? What you're seeking to please is who you're serving. Or who you're seeking to please, that's who you're going to serve. And that shouldn't be misconstrued to say that you'll never be pleasing to people. That shouldn't be misconstrued that way. But if pleasing people and pleasing the Lord are adverse to one another, like you can't do both, then you have to always choose pleasing the Lord. But here's the one I wanted to go to, and then we'll try to bring in these last 2 points real quickly. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, Paul says this. He says in verses 1 through 5, he says, and I, brethren, when I came to you, did not come with excellency of speech or of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God. And he goes on to talk about the fact that I determined not to know anything among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. That's the only thing I wanted to know. Listen to verse 3. I was with you in weakness, in fear, and much trembling. Then he says, in my speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of human wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. You know what he says? He says, when I came to you, he's doing a contrast, because the Corinthians, they liked these preachers with real flowery words, enticing, human wisdom, eloquent people, bedazzle you with their PhD, and just throw these eloquent words out there, this psychobabble we hear today, and they would just come in and just, ooh. And Paul says, when I came to you, I just came in with Jesus Christ, Him crucified, and I came in the power of the Spirit, and I just preached the gospel in the power of the Spirit and left it where it was. And he says, when I did that, I didn't come in strong, I came in weak. When I came in, I didn't come in as this courageous guy that knows everything. I came in weakness, I came in fear, and I came in with much trembling. In other words, what I'm trying to get across to you is that when you're preaching the gospel, when you're sharing the word, when you're telling the truth, it doesn't mean you're always going to feel strong, you're always going to feel assured, you're always going to feel that you're never going to feel fear, or that you're never going to feel like you're not going to tremble. You may feel fear, you may be trembling when you're saying it, your voice might be quivering when you say it, but you say it. Right? Paul says, I'm preaching the gospel, and man, there's times I was so weak. Right? Remember what Jesus taught him? My grace is sufficient for you. For my strength is made perfect in weakness. And he says, I would rather boast in my infirmities, my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. He goes on to say, for when I'm weak, then I'm strong. And he's saying, guys, when I came, you might feel weak, folks. You might feel afraid. You might feel trembling, quivering. You're going to have to learn to do things afraid. And you're going to have to learn to speak when you're fearful and when you're timid and when you're shy and when you're awkward. You're going to have to speak when you don't feel like speaking. When you feel weak, that's when the Lord makes you strong. When you feel fear, that's when you overcome fear. By fearing Him who is greater than all those things you fear. We act like Paul never felt fear, that he never trembled, never worried about anything, never had any concerns. That's not the case. You wouldn't have to tell people not to fear if they didn't feel fear ever. We might have to continue this next week. This is not going at all the way I was expecting it to. So let's just wrap it up. Where are we going to wrap it up, right? We'll wrap it up next week. That's what we'll do. All right? Just take this away today, right? Persecution comes not to the silent, but to the proclaiming. People will love you for your good works. They will not love you when you proclaim Jesus Christ is Lord and the only way of salvation. That they will not love. In that setting, in that situation, you may feel fear, you may feel weakness, you may be in trepidation, but it's in that the Lord strengthens you, makes you strong. You might be in this church, and you might feel like you have a gift for something, but fear keeps you from doing it. I told you before, right? And I am not lying, right? I don't like being in front of people. I don't like leading anything. I don't like public speaking. Did you know I used to shake and quiver to get up in front of people? I hated it. I despise. I don't have a natural inclination to get up and teach. Like some people just have a knack for teaching things, or they got a knack for getting up and being in public, and they can work a crowd and everything like that. That's not me at all. If I followed my natural inclinations, I wouldn't do anything of what I do over my whole adult life, basically. You have to differentiate between natural giftedness that a person has versus something that is supernatural that God grants and God gives that's beyond your natural human giftedness. Natural human giftedness, I wouldn't do anything ever like this. But you might have a gift and you don't respond, you don't do anything because you're afraid, you're fearful. You're shy, you're timid, you don't want to get up in front of people, you don't want to say something, you want to do something. And I'm not trying to say you have to be me, or maybe it's not the same, it's not apples for apples and oranges for oranges, you know what I mean? So it may not, but I'm saying don't let fear keep you from using the gift that God gave you, whatever gift that might be. Don't let that keep you. Or don't assume that, because I'm afraid I can't do it. Right? You're going to have to overcome that even if you feel it while you're doing it. Right? And there's times still today I'll feel fear. Still to this day. Right? Not every Sunday, not every sermon, not every week, not every place I've been. But there's times you'll still feel it. You'll still feel that weakness, that's common, right? You feel sick, you got a headache. I had a headache this morning. Right? You just press through it. And don't respond to the feelings, respond to faith. So take that with you. We'll come back next week. We'll talk about the 3 reasons that Jesus gives us in this text why we should not fear. So part 3, I think it'll mean something to you as it all comes together. Let's pray. Father, help us to all grow and to develop in our faith, in our giftings that you've granted to us, and help us to be good and faithful followers of Christ, those that, like we're reading here, people that are willing to go, willing to say, willing to speak, willing to do, and don't allow the fear of man to ensnare us or entrap us and minimize our voice and minimize our actions. Lord, thank you for being merciful to us. We are certainly not perfected people, but you are perfect, and in your perfection you are gracious. And Lord, help us to learn that in our strengths that we would be merciful just as you are strong and yet you are merciful. In Jesus' name, amen.